Good evening, everyone. I'm Marilyn O'Connor, President of the Board of Directors of the Vilna, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's virtual Vilna event. The Vilna is proud to present tonight's program, the first in a three-part series. We are committed to facilitating conversations and exploring the most pressing issues of the day. Over 100 years ago, when the building was first built, Jews gathered to discuss and debate important issues of their time. Operating now as a cultural center for community-wide engagement, we are proud to carry on the tradition of bringing people together, building community, and deepening understanding. We hope that when we can once again gather in person, you will join us in our historic building on Beacon Hill for more discussions such as these. We hope you will also join us next Monday, December 7th, and on December 14th for parts 2 and 3 of this series. Registration is available on the Vilna's website. Here's how our program tonight will work. Our moderator for the evening, Andy Tarsy, will lead a discussion with our panelists, Robin Washington, Deborah Frieze, and Tali Puterman. The last 20 to 25 minutes will be reserved for Q&A. So if at any point you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box located in your Zoom taskbar. Before we begin our program, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Andy Tarsy. Andy leads Emblem Strategic LLC, a strategic advisory firm that helps organizations gain advantage by aligning their vision with their values. He's also co-founder of Conscious Customers LLC, a tech-enabled solutions company created to help organizations of all kinds put Black and Latin-owned businesses at the center of their spending. Andy's work at the Anti-Defamation League earned him a spot in 2007 on the Forward 50 list of the most influential Jewish professionals in the US. He is former president of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute and a founder and past president of the Alliance for Business Leadership. Andy is the recipient of the NAACP's Kivi Kaplan Humanitarian Award in 2008 and received the Max Michelson Humanitarian Award from Jewish Family Services of Metro West in 2017. The Racial Justice Initiative he led at Boston's Temple Israel created a purchasing and investment initiative that earned him the Union of Reform Judaism's Irving J. Thain Award in 2018. He is a trustee of the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology. We are honored to have Andy join us in tonight's thought-provoking discussion. And now it is my honor to welcome Andy Tarsy.
Thank you, Marilyn, and I apologize for inflicting that on everyone, but it's just such a cool thing to be able to get together with people whose voices I know and whose stories I know something about, and bring them together and share them with everybody through the Vilna Shul. So if I have to listen to that and inflict everybody with hearing about me in order to get to the folks that we want to bring up, then I'm willing. So thank you, Vilna. Thank you, Marilyn, for your leadership through such a strange and difficult time in keeping the spaces open where we have these conversations. Such incredible, important work. Thank you, Mark Jacobs, the interim executive director and my friend and teacher, who's responsible for bringing this together in the first place, and Lynn Krasker, who's the program and outreach director at the Vilna Shul. So you guys have been phenomenal to work with, and we appreciate you. So can I say a couple words about why we're here and what this is about? And then I'm going to introduce our panel, and we'll get into the nitty gritty. So look, I wish we were all together. I wish we had all made a dinner reservation for 8:30, around the corner from the Vilna Shul, and we were gathering for some wine and a nibble, and then having some culture time and some tough conversation. But here we are. We're all wherever we need to be. On Zoom. Some of you are at home on a couch. Some of you are parked under a street light watching us on your phone. Some of you are stuck at that desk you've been at all day. But we're going to try to create a conversation tonight that generates more light than heat, and that gives us something practical we can take forward. When Mark approached me about trying to create some content around this question of being an anti-racist as a Jewish community. The people who are with us tonight are the first people that I said I would rather listen to than anything I could say. And the second thing I said was, we can't do it in one night. We need a series. We need to unfold and unpack some of these topics if we're going to be of use. The number one thing I would like is for us to be useful in empowering people to do more in the world. We are, as Jews, those of us who are from that faith tradition or cultural tradition, know that we are not strangers as a people to things like oppression and being outsiders and having to break down or abide by systems of exclusion and of deprivation. We're also from a tradition that's rich with law and commentary, urging that we not stand idly by when we see these things happening to anyone. And so we have a lot to work from with this question of what does it even mean to be an ally? Warning, we're going to push pretty deep into that. I will reveal to you that I have a stealth thesis that we could be doing a lot more as individuals. And that in many cases, my theory is, and my panelists tonight can either rebut it or take it in a different direction, is that we don't necessarily have the knowledge or the skills or even the disposition and the attitude that we need for the times. And we do have the desire to have those in many cases, but we need to up our game. And the question I'm putting on the table for the group is, how can we remake ourselves as more effective allies on the subject of anti-racism and economic empowerment? These are twin hydras and they operate together. I want to say additionally that I'm not just talking about an other that Jewish people are supposed to rise up and be an ally for. Within our own community, we have extraordinary and often neglected and negated diversity. And so we want to celebrate that tonight as well and embrace the question of, are we even being allies for each other in an authentic way? And if not, when are we going to start? And what's it going to take? So with that, I want everybody to think in terms of a rubric that I'm borrowing from the education world: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. 3 categories. If you're taking notes, if you have a piece of paper, and my mother probably does, make those 3 columns. And as you join us tonight and through the next couple of sessions, what we want to do is really inventory. What are you hearing and what are you thinking about the knowledge you need to be a difference maker at a new level? The skills that you either feel you have or don't have or ought to have or want to acquire, and then the attitude. Where are you feeling your head is with regard to the struggles that are out there? And where do we need to get our heads in order, again, to raise our game, to be better allies? So let me stop with that and encourage that everybody follow along. And I first want to introduce my co-host and convener, Nia Evans. Nia, can you, there she is. Can we get Nia the floor for a moment? So I want to introduce her properly, but Nia, I approached to do this together because she is working with such innovation on these problems of racism and economic deprivation and oppression, and from a very eyes wide open, but empowering direction, not pathologizing it, but empowering people to take control of situations and to create opportunity and to deal in the humility that you can't do it alone. The power in our society is not distributed equally. So if we don't get into partnership with people who have other resources, you can't fix the problem. And I think I'll tell you a couple of quick things about Nia, and then Nia, I want you to say hello, because then we're going to need you to help carry this conversation forward. So Nia is the executive director of the Boston Ujima Project. Her educational background is in labor relations, education, leadership, and public policy. And her advocacy focuses on eliminating barriers between the causes, the opportunities that exist in this extraordinary society and the groups that are so habitually, historically, and continually and presently left out and kept out even more by structures that we need to talk about how we dismantle. She is a co-creator of multimedia exhibits and learning vehicles. She's the framer of policy debates. She's an organizer of neighborhoods. She has her bachelor's degree from Cornell, like me and Marilyn, so that's great. And she got a master's. I thought it was at Columbia, but they're telling me it was at Cornell. But you can correct us. You have a couple. Oh, you got a master's at Columbia and master's at Cornell. That's why. Anyway, she lives in Cambridge too, and she's just a treasure to know and be taught by about some of the stuff and to partner with. So Nia, say hello to us.
Thank you very much, Andy. Hello, everyone. Once again, I'm Nia Evans. I'm the Executive Director of Boston Ujima Project. And just really quickly, the master's is only from Columbia, not from both. Otherwise, I'm very happy to be here. Really appreciate that Andy came to me to talk about this series. I found it immediately compelling. Boston Ujima Project has participated and continues to participate in the purchasing and racial justice initiative that Andy created at Temple Israel. And we've enjoyed quite a fruitful partnership mediated by Andy with Temple Israel. And so we are always happy to be in conversation with Andy, with Temple Israel, and with extended communities. So as Andy said, you will be joining us on Monday, December 7th and Monday, December 14th in parts 2 and 3 of this series. Tonight, I will have the pleasure of listening to my close colleagues, Deborah Frieze, and getting to hear more of her brilliance and learn more about her. And I also look forward to learning more about Tali, and this will be my first time meeting Robin tonight. Additionally, I look forward to whatever questions and comments come from the audience. I will be taking notes myself, and we'll be looking for the expertise and experiences and questions of the panelists, as well as the expertise and experiences and questions of the participants to carry into our conversation on Monday evening. There you'll join the 2 other members of our team, Johnny Charles, who's the managing director of the Ujima Fund, and Jenny Jeffrard, who is our business alliance coach, as well as one of our business owners, Laura Holmes. And so once again, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Marilyn. And thank you, Lynn.
All right, that's great. So can we have the panelists now? People are waiting patiently, and I know there are, at least according to my screen, a couple hundred of you. So here comes the good part. I'm going to introduce them briefly. Everybody has a link that details their bios in significant detail. So I'm going to not do that. But hopefully everybody can see each of the folks on the screen. And if anybody wants to reach me and just prompt me about this, Lynn, you know how to get to me. But as far if we're good to go, then let me just introduce these guys. So Robin Washington is a journalist. He's a lot more than that. He's a civic leader. He's a mensch. He's been a friend. He's been the kind of friend that tells you the truth for me for a long time, even if we haven't gotten the chance to know each other as well as I'd like. He is an accomplished documentary filmmaker, sort of gumshoe newspaper reporter, but also is a sophisticated conceptual editor and enterprise journalist, has worked in every medium that there is, but is currently most likely to be found on public radio in the Midwest, which is one of his homes, and here in Boston through GBH, which is another of his homes. So Robin will be with us in a moment when I introduce the others. He also grew up in a Chicago family of Black and Jewish civil rights activists, and in his life as a practicing Jew has confronted a range of bits of ignorance from people like me when I first met him and didn't know how to engage properly with the complexity of my own community, and has had to teach more people than should be his obligation about how to even embrace and be an ally within the Jewish community. So that'll be an interesting conversation. Deborah Frieze, from a family in the Jewish community here that has a few arms and legs, like a lot of us do. So people may have met Deborah or other Friezes. What I'm excited to say is she's been blazing a trail and teaching me as well about new models of being an ally, new ways of showing up in the world of equity and social justice. She's the founder and president of the Boston Impact Initiative, which is an impact investing fund that is housed in the city of Boston, but is actually raising capital and making investments beyond Boston with a lens for the capital they invest that is seeking not only a financial relationship, but social impact as well. So we're going to talk about what that means. And I'm very curious to hear what you're seeing out there, Deborah, but also what you need from people that are trying to help, and whether you feel like we're ready to help, or what do we need to know to be of use. Tali Puterman is my friend, my partner in crime at Temple Israel. She was born in Cape Town, South Africa. She's recently married. And more importantly, she's the assistant director of social justice engagement at Temple Israel in Boston. She's an educator, an activist, an advocate. She is a facilitator. She has more gifts than we have time to talk about, and gives of them generously. But the one that I value the most is her mind, her thinking about these topics, the complexity, the nuance, the willingness to stay in the conversation and hear the whole thing and figure out how it all comes together toward action at the end. A very special talent. And Tali is Tufts and Brandeis educated, and has taken a lot of courses through Marshall Gans at the Kennedy School at Harvard. So like a lot of folks on here, I didn't read everybody's full resume, but you've got some talent to contend with tonight. So a famous filmmaker said that like 80% of life is showing up. Congratulations to all of you. Tonight, you're at 80%. And I think the rest of this conversation is about what's the other 20? And is maybe 80 to take a less humorous take on that sort of joke. Was 80 too much? Is showing up actually not 80%? Do we actually have a lot more that we need to be working on? Because we're pretty good at showing up. But the question is, are we really as useful in engaging with these issues as we need to be? So I'm going to ask you first, Robin. I want to go way back with each of you first. What was it about the way you grew up that shapes the way you think about the topics we're on tonight? Take us back a little ways, not too far.
Not too far, not too much, otherwise we'll be here all night. So you did say in your notes for this event that you might be brash and interrupt people. Feel free. Thank you.
Well, give us a minute on where you started. And I want to get everybody's out there first before we get you into the issue.
That was my preamble saying it was going to take way more than a minute. So I grew up in Chicago. I was born and raised in Chicago. My mother was Jewish and not Black. My father was Black and not Jewish. I point that out because you can be both, and that makes me 100% of each by any definition of Black, one drop, and this is way more than one drop here, and by any definition of Jewish. And the three things that inform my life today and growing up with my mother and my father, but particularly my mother, was a civil rights activist. I am unhesitatingly saying she was a leader. That's important because that word is thrown around to a lot of people who weren't necessarily or don't want to be called. But she was an officer of Chicago CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the NAACP. And she took me and my brother, who's a few years, 3.5 years older than me, on marches and sit-ins and protests when I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. I remember them but like yesterday. This was in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, mostly for me. I remember one particular sit-in that, as I look back as a journalist, I did research on it. It turns out it was probably one of the longest continuous sit-ins in the whole civil rights movement. Was in Chicago at the Chicago Board of Education, more than a week long. My brother doesn't remember if we stayed there a whole week. He doesn't think so, but I remember being there overnight.
So that's pretty intense. That's pretty intense formative stuff. I'm already going to get back to that, but that's a pretty
One very important point on that is I have no memory of not knowing what it was all about. It was the fight against de facto segregation in Chicago public schools. And I could tell you all about that at age 6. And the things that inform my life and career today are Judaism, justice, and journalism.
nice. That's very elegant and fortuitous. Tali, what about the way you started informs what you're doing now and the choices that you've made on these topics tonight?
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for having me here tonight. So I was born in Cape Town, South Africa, in the early 90s. I was born when the apartheid regime was coming to an end, and I was actually the first baby born in Cape Town not to be racially labeled by the government. So when I was born, I was in the newspaper on my earliest day of life, and I was in the paper alongside some babies of color, and we were all together in the same hospital room, and we became kind of a symbol for what a post-racial society might look like, or one where we had achieved some type of racial equality. And as a white person growing up in South Africa and growing up in an insular Jewish community, I really did believe that we had achieved some type of racial equality, that when the laws were changed, that we as a society had now become equal and racism had ended to a very serious degree. And I think that as I was growing older, as I moved to the United States, as I became a lot more aware of structural racism and the impacts of decades of oppression, that doesn't just go away when we change some laws, and that interpersonal racism is not the only way to look at issues such as that, I really came to understand my own racism in a much deeper way, and how easy it can be for what I believe people with the best of intentions, white people specifically, can go about in life and perpetuate and be racist without really recognizing these systems in place. And that is a part, that's just my 1-minute window into a personal story of mine that really drives me into this work, and I'm sure I'll have opportunity to expand on that.
Oh yeah, we'll come back to it, but I wanted to hear people to hear that story about your start, because I think it's pretty fascinating. Deborah, how about yourself? Where did your early years contribute to where you're engaging with these topics now?
So we're going to bring it a little closer to home. I was raised in Newton. I think it's possible, I have to ask my parents. I think I might have been conceived in Mattapan and was part of white flight. My older brothers were born in Mattapan. We were part of white flight to Newton. I was raised in the Newton school system with Black kids bussed in the METCO program. But more importantly and more formative was there was a legacy of civil rights activism in my family. So my Aunt Judy, my father's sister, was a freedom rider jailed in Mississippi. That story was always very present with me growing up. And it also came from a lineage before that. My great-grandmother, Sarah Gordon, who came over from Eastern Europe, she had a reputation. She was put on McCarthy's list as a communist. She certainly was a socialist. She may have been a communist. And I was raised with this legacy of the women on my father's side of the family being these radicals, and the men being hustlers and entrepreneurs. And I kind of got a little bit of both. So I was like, how do you blend radical activism and pretty edgy entrepreneurship, which brings me into the work I'm in today.
Love it. All right. So I'm going to come back to you, Robin, for the next piece of this. I framed something out there with knowledge, skills, attitudes. We need some of each to be effective. How do you think we're doing in the Jewish community specifically? And I know that is an impossible, it is not a noun that really exists. In Jewish communities where you circulate and in the driving the culture of the big cities in America right now, how do you think we're doing as allies in the struggles that are in our headlines every day this year?
I really don't know, actually. I don't know. How do you measure it? Against what? I think a lot of it, I think some of the most important stuff has to be internal. I mean, you're sitting here and we're talking about allyship and affecting someone else. I want to get to that in a minute, but the main thing is, what do you feel? I mean, you and I go back, right? And without dragging it into, we were talking about the Black Jewish Seder. And I told you back then, this was 20, 30 years ago, whatever it was, that I bristled at it. Every Seder I've been to is a Black Jewish Seder, okay? And every Seder I'm going to is going to be one. And so it's, you know, where you put a hyphen or is it a slash or whatever, and Blacks and Jews are not mutually exclusive. But to internalize that as you have and to understand that is the first step you have to take, because otherwise you're going to be looking at it as two separate groups, as this the whole allyship. The word bothers me. I bristle at that like I do Black Jewish Seder. You know, you don't get a certificate that you're an ally. I actually had a reporter who worked for me once say that. I got my diversity certificate.
Yeah.
Great. Does that mean you can N-word all day now? I mean, come on, and he did.
But when we show up to be an ally, sometimes we're a consumer. Sometimes we're getting an experience, like we're getting.
So that goes back to what I said about internalizing it. You know, the whole thing, it bristles for me to hear Jews refer to themselves as white. On the other hand, there's a great distinction, particularly in the last 6 months, of white Jews as people finally begin to recognize there are Jews of color, like all over the place, like bigger numbers than you ever thought. And so it's very deep. And you said that, you know, it's impossible to answer this thing in any one simple question, but one answer. But on the one hand, do you think of yourself as white? Do you really think of yourself as a white American? And if you do, or if you don't, do you understand how other people may perceive you? Those are very, very deep, and yet it's necessary toward doing anything. And I want to get back to doing something later.
I want to stay on this topic of the diversity within the Jewish community for another beat. So Tali, you've been working within this synagogue context in a period of time when people are acknowledging in a new way that it is more diverse, and it always has been of a people. How are we doing showing up as allies internally right now? What are some of the experiences you've had of how a predominantly white Jewish community where you work is showing up?
Yeah, I agree with Robin. That's a challenging question to answer, and also to what are we measuring. But as somebody who works at Temple Israel of Boston, I am proud of how we're showing up. I don't think that we've got all of the answers done and dusted, and that we can like get our certificate of allyship and we don't have work to do. But I am seeing serious recognition and reckoning on our community's part, from the top, from our leadership, from our senior rabbis and our boards, to our community members that are really wanting to do some deep listening, deep learning, and reckoning that we have really missed the mark over time, that we are racist, not because that's a personal fault within ourselves, but because society is racist. The United States is built in a racist society, and therefore we as humans learn to be racist, and particularly in predominantly white spaces that does show up. And so I find it hard to answer like that question exactly, how are we doing, but seeing people really talking about this, the fact that this conversation is happening tonight, the fact that there are many attendees here wanting to learn more, engage in this conversation, there's much work to do, but I do believe that that's a really important starting point in answering that question.
Okay, so I'm going to hold off Deborah on bringing you into this for 1 second, because I want to go back. Robin, you've been Black and Jewish all your life. Sort of a weird year where the Ashkenazi-centric American Jewish community is starting to have some conversations about the fact that you even exist. How does that feel?
Well, I've been pretty vocal about it, so there's been no question to anybody who's ever met me that I exist. No, I mean, actually, frankly, it feels great, because this is stuff that I've been working on professionally for 30 odd years. I'm a co-founder of the Alliance of Black Jews in 1995, which got a lot of press and a lot of attention, and a lot of people saying, oh, and really, are there tons of articles on a 101 level saying, are there Black Jews? Now we're beyond that discussion. It was great a few years ago for a young lady to tell me, there's no big deal about that. I know tons of Black Jews, you know? And my point at the time was that if you think about it, you do too, you know, and this is 20, 30 years ago. So now there are so many, there's no way anybody cannot know individuals, people, family members.
But there are structures that need to be confronted, right? There's plenty of work going on now about how being an ally is not about just about sort of helping someone if they're being assaulted or being, you know, insulted. It's about dismantling structure and the way in which we then build new structures. So what are some structures on that topic before
Well,
we...
I just want to accentuate what you just said, because that's exactly what I meant by you don't need the certificate. That, you know, we don't, it's, yes, I want to get along with you. We want to break bread or matzah or whatever it is that we do. But, and we want to have a Black Jewish Seder, I guess, and do that too. But the point is, what are you doing? What are you doing to change?
So give us a couple of structural points on specifically the Black Jewish experience. You did some really powerful work earlier this year on literally tabulating the presence of Black human beings in Jewish organization leadership in the country and came up with almost none. What do we have to do as Jewish organizations to acknowledge and dismantle rather than just sort of empathize?
Right. So, and what you're referring to was an article I had that was widely disseminated in the Jewish press of a study I did with a colleague, and of the board members, 2,000 or so, of all the member organizations of the Council of Presidents of major Jewish organizations in the United States. And we found that 0.2% were Black. And these were the same organizations that were saying George Floyd's death is an outrage and we need to do things now. And the reason I take this, and the Jews of color, by the way, made up 2%. And then a large number of those were, if you counted the many members of the American Sephardic Association. So, you know.
Give me another number.
Yeah.
Robin, give me one more number. How many, what's the percentage in the American Jewish population that we can compare the 0.2% against?
At the lowest possible count of African-American Jews, I'm not speaking of Ethiopians, I'm not speaking of Black Hebrew or Israelites, of African-American halakhic Jews. If you can even, by the way, define such things, like if you can even define a Jew, but we won't get into that, right?
Right, all those caveats.
The lowest possible number is 2% of the American Jewish population. The American Jewish population is Black. That may be as high as 4 or 6%. Jews of color, it may be as high as 20%, depending what you count as a Jew. I'm sorry, count as of color. Again, we counted people in the American Sephardic Association, I may be getting their name wrong, but the Sephardic group, as people of color. They may not even consider themselves people of color. Tali, you said something about, your racial classification. That's a really important point, because race changes. If you guys take home nothing of what I say but this, and this is one of the major things in the study, race changes depending where you are in time and when you are in time and where you are. So in South Africa, you may actually not have a race according to the time when you were born. A few years later, you definitely would have. In the United States, I guarantee most Jews 100 years ago would not be considered white. And somebody's written a book, When Jews Became White. It happens to other population groups except Black people, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And
so there's so much we could get into with that, but I want to acknowledge at the outset.
Well, but that's important, because go back to what I said about your internal, who are
right.
you? What do you identify as?
And where are you starting from?
Know yourself to have empathy.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think, Tali, you and I have talked about this, about, you know, what causes somebody to step forward and engage and forge into this question of being an active part of dealing with anti-racism work, working on economic justice. And you talked about how important relationships are in your practice. What I want to do is bring in Deborah at this point, and then we'll bring it. So broadening it outside of the fact that we have to validate within the Jewish family, as diverse as it is, we've got a lot of work we've just begun showing up for each other. And by the way, we just talked about Black Jews, but the question of the LGBTQIA community, the question of interfaith, the questions about what is halachic. So that could be a whole other night. But I wanted to start there, even with the clock ticking, because I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that the work of being an ally doesn't begin when we put our boots on and our coat on and go out to some other place. That this year for me is an awakening to the fact that there is work all around you that needs more of you, and it needs you to sharpen your tools. Deborah, your work is confronting some of the equity gaps that are formidable and that are commingled with racism. What has been the experience of your year, and what has been the experience for you of all these people suddenly wanting to be more helpful?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of calls this year. I want to start with one thing on allyship and then answer that. And about 3 weeks ago or so, I found myself in a conversation on a panel with the amazing Suffolk County District Attorney, Rachel Rollins. And she was not a big fan of allyship either. And she said, I'm not looking for allies. I am looking for unindicted co-conspirators. And allies are people who send a text or they whisper to you, keep it up. I believe in what you're doing. I'm cheering you on. And she's like, not interested. What I'm interested in is an accomplice who's a partner in wrongdoing, or in this case, in right doing, right? That's what she's looking for. So there's a doing aspect, which brings me, I think, to our work, which is, so first of all, there is allyship. It's critical that we get informed, to your point, Andy, about knowledge and skills and disposition. We have a lot to learn and we have a lot to unlearn. And I'm sure we can dig into that more, but I want to talk about what it means to really step up in the moment. And if we identify as people with privilege, whether that is class privilege or race privilege or financial privilege, whatever it may be, there is a moment being called for of recognizing that we actually are colluding in creating the system that we've got. So here comes COVID, right? Which is this biologically impartial disease that wreaks havoc very, very partially in our community, whether it's like 3 times the number of Black people dying as white people, or 90% of the minority-owned businesses that applied for PPP, for government support, getting denied in the first round, or the unemployment rate. So we know that here comes this neutral thing into our system and structure, and it reveals to us, it shows us our shadow. It shows how unequal our society is by design, not by accident. So then all these people started calling me this year, mostly white women, saying, oh my God, we live in a racist society. How can I help? And our work is about, I'll be very candid, our work is about the redistribution of wealth and power. Now, we are an investment fund, and the investment fund is about moving money from where it's accumulated, which is mostly in the hands of the white majority, which, by the way, will not be the majority in a couple decades, which is really relevant about this moment. Moving hands from the white majority and redistributing it to where it's been extracted from, part one, and part two, ensuring that it's not just the folks who've accumulated wealth who make the decisions about where the capital flows. So there's a lot I can get to in there in specifics, but it has to do with, if you have money of any level, I'm not talking about like, you don't have to be a millionaire. If you have money, it sits in a bank somewhere. Is that bank doing good things or bad things in the community? Does it advance or work against equity? Right?
Well, I could literally put money in a fund like yours, and Tali,
Well, so
your
where
team.
do you bank? Where do you invest?
Okay.
Right? So you invest in a fund like ours, and it's going to go to entrepreneurs of color. Where do you do philanthropy? Where does your philanthropy sit before it's allocated, right? What investment fund, what donor advised fund? So there's a lot to be done with all of those activities.
So let's go
and
to
it's
knowledge.
pragmatic.
Let's go to knowledge for a second. So one thing that folks that are with us tonight can ask themselves, and by the way, you may all be the go to the head of the class types, or we may all be in different places in a curve right now. But do we know enough about if equity is a euphemism for money, if economic empowerment is a euphemism for misery that is caused by a set of systems over time, then where your money is and what you're doing with it is more than just sort of do you contribute to charity and pay your taxes?
Absolutely.
I need more knowledge about where my money is. I know Nia is still with us and does work that's similar to what you're doing. Do people come to you understanding that, or do they think that this is sort of charity work and do they see a distinction? Are you seeing an awakening to that knowledge?
Both. When we started doing this in 2013, I would say there were only some very, very progressive millennials and female impact investors primarily who are coming to us saying, I want to put my money where my values are. How do I do that? Oh, you guys care about the racial wealth divide. I can invest to close the racial wealth divide. Great. Today, and then I would run into people who are like, this is charity. I just want to do charity. And they wouldn't understand the bigger story that, like, the wealth that's accumulated in the left hand is passing some money on to the right hand to mitigate the work that the left hand is doing to create. Today, I got calls, this year, I got calls from JP Morgan Chase. I got calls from one of the biggest private equity boutiques. I got calls from big consulting firms saying, oh goodness, we have a problem. What do we do? They haven't moved their money yet, but they're asking. It's a little late to wake up is what but we're here. We're having a moment. People are noticing that something maybe is different. And I think COVID has amplified and accelerated the waking up moment. And let me just say one thing. This isn't a different moment. The racial wealth divide is the same as it was in 1968. So we're in the same situation. 70 years, nothing has changed. So beyond 1960, it hasn't changed. So we're in the same moment we've been. Maybe things are actually worse for a number of other social reasons. But the wake up moment is happening among, I think, white folks, whether it's the Trump era, whether it's COVID, whatever it may be.
So
and then the question on us is, how do we stay awake and not just have it be a moment that passes and we try to go back to some comfortable time before?
So
Which is exactly what happened in 1968, by the way.
Exactly.
So, yes.
There's
In 1968, we had all kinds of Black journalists suddenly were qualified, suddenly hired. There was an amazing program in Boston, the Community Media Committee, that there was a demand from very radical Black and Hispanic people to have a Spanish language column in the Globe. You thought, that'll never happen. They did it. They actually ran for several years. Where is it today?
Well, Tali, I want to bring you in a second to talk about how you're applying some of these things in this environment. But Robin, stay on that for a second. You're a professional observer. You've covered these narratives through different eras. You have transportation as an area of expertise. Where is the equity thing and the racism thing playing out most profoundly in what you're seeing right now? Is it in a category? How do you?
Deborah said it in one word: wealth. And wealth is not income. And it's great, by the way. I see a comment by someone that they put money in One United Bank. That's great. That's fine. That's actually forward helping wealth. I just have to say, for people who don't understand that wealth is not income, I am by no means, I hesitate to use the word comfortable, but thanks to my wife's investing, we hit the elbow, right? The elbow is the point where your income or your assets, are greater than your expenses. And then it goes up. And then you start making money on your assets. Remember a few years ago when Romney's secretary was said to be paying more taxes in terms of percentage than he was? They both were paying more than $750, by the way. Well, the difference wasn't so much that outrage. The difference was his income was all from wealth, was all from investments. He didn't go out and, do anything on a job. He didn't even sell property. It was just all money, making money. That, by the way, is a horrible system, but it's what we have. And it's exactly what the Black community totally needs. Number one, remember the study from the Fed, right? Your typical white wealth was $200,000, $300,000. Your Black wealth was $24,
$8.
$8.
$8 in Boston.
Right.
So I want to go.
I don't know how you do it. I hope Deborah's on the road to it. Sounds like it.
Well, Tali, take us.
But I know what the problem is.
So wealth, it drives everything. But we've had times when it was going to be all about education, and then all of these things are interacting with each other, of course. Again, so showing up on the wealth topic. If let's just take that, since you put it out there as a topic that unifies economic empowerment and racism in this country. Deborah, you started. We'll come back to you. Tali, is in a synagogue, is there an awareness that that's the definition, a way of defining the problem holistically? And what are some of the strategies, programs, initiatives that come at it, if you feel like there are some?
Definitely a way. And as my job in synagogue organizing, I don't think I or we have internalized wealth as the focus only. And we're spending a lot of time also thinking about our internal structures, how we as a synagogue, instead of doing work kind of out there in that community, what is it like in our community, and how are we showing up as anti-racist in our own community for our own selves, recognizing that Jews of color, if you follow recent studies, make up 12 to 15% of our Jewish community. And so definitely a piece, but not the piece that we're focusing on, but some ways that we have focused on wealth and economic justice in that sense is through, well, I'm going to say relationship building. And relationship building is also much bigger than just in this wealth department. When you're talking about knowledge, Andy, and skills and attitudes, I'm going to put relationships right there in the center of it. But if we are going to spend money in Black-owned businesses, if we want to switch the way that we're investing, that's something that we want to make sure that we're building relationships with Black-owned business owners in the area, that we're doing this in relationship, in partnership, hearing stories, sharing stories, and that we're doing this as community in relationships. But yes, asking the questions that Deborah was saying, where is our money sitting? And you don't have to be a millionaire to have money in a bank. And what is your bank? Is your bank, I mean, Deborah already said it, so I don't have to repeat it, but also where are you purchasing from? Where do you get your coffee from? Where do you buy your books from? Is it from Frugal Bookstore, or is it from Amazon? Where do you who walks your dog? Andy, you've shared Leash as a place that can do that. So being able to highlight, advertise Black-owned businesses, but also ensure that we're in community with them as well in relationship, and therefore not doing this for anyone, but doing it with.
That is a really important part of the work that I've done with you and with the whole community. I think someone maybe misspoke in giving me credit for it, but it is utterly communal. I want to highlight the fact that we've got more people making purchasing decisions from places that are owned by people of color, and that is a part of it. But that at the same time, Temple Israel said, again, with the help of Deborah and of Nia, so relationships. Okay, when you think about attitudes, we didn't know. We asked. We brought them to us 3-4 years ago to say, where should we be participating here? And they said, Shagun Idawu, Deborah Frieze, Nia Evans, and others said wealth to an extent in various different words, Robin. And we looked at purchasing, and then we looked at investing. And we said, let's see what they mean by this impact investing. What is it like, Deborah, when people like synagogue groups, do-gooder groups, philanthropists show up and say they'd like to allocate a little bit of their wealth to an instrument that is addressing this through the financial system?
So I found some not all, faith-based institutions have been actually really remarkable, right? So Temple Israel was one of the first institutions to dive in and buy a note in our fund, which means investing out of the endowment to support entrepreneurs of color in Eastern Massachusetts, and several faith-based institutions from the Christian community as well. Those that lead with an agenda, a social justice agenda. And it's becoming more common. It's certainly not common. We still have the traditional mindset, which is the endowment should make as much money as it can at any cost to yield the operating capital or the philanthropic capital that's supposed to do the good. And, you know, the paradox, of course, is we may be investing in private prisons in our endowment while trying to do work with people who are coming out of the criminal justice system with our philanthropy. And so we have to look at the paradox and say, what's going on? If I'm here, I'm trying to do my philanthropy and I care deeply and my heart is in it, and I'm not even looking at where my assets are. So that's the first paradox that we have to get. So if everybody can just take a look under the hood and really say, is my financial capital advancing or damaging the issues I care about most? And if I care about inequality, I care about racial inequality, what's going on with where my money sits? And if I care about my place, that's the other question. So most money leaves the community. I go invest on Wall Street or wherever it is, and it's not doing anything to come back home. So faith-based institutions, Temple Israel was the first to say, wow, we're here. We're what's known as an anchor institution. We're an institution that's not going anywhere. We're here in the community. What's our obligation beyond our walls? And I think that's such an essential question, whether you're asking that in the micro question of your own household or your neighborhood or the institutions you affiliate with or your workplace. What is my relationship beyond the wall? So who gets in is one question. And I think you're in that question about who's a Jew, right? And who do we see and who do we acknowledge? Who gets in and who's outside for whom my fate is tied up with their fate. That's a very Ubuntu idea out of South Africa, but like, we're in this together. We know that more than ever right now, again, with COVID shining a light on how in this together we are. And yet we wall ourselves off like we're not responsible. So there's an opportunity to look both within and outside. And again, the territory I work in is using the asset of money, but capital includes social capital. Who do I know? Who do I introduce people to? Knowledge capital. Who am I sharing my knowledge with? Sorry, let me say one thing about that. Without arrogance and without the assumption that I know and you don't know. So one thing I do observe.
That's an attitude thing. So talk to me about that, Tali, for a second. I know that half of our congregation is probably watching tonight, and you know, we're capable of being honest with each other without being rude to each other. But do we have the skills and the attitude to participate here? Are we ready to be in the presence of such true pain and to be accountable?
I hope that we have the skills and attitudes, and if people don't feel that they have them yet, they're on a pathway to building what those is. And I think that the skills and attitudes that I believe call people to this work are things that everybody has access to. I just started to learn how to do woodworking, and I don't think that spatial and numbers and those things, that's not something that's inherent to me, and it's something that I'm learning. And I'm not asking for somebody to bring, you know, great numbers, anything, or some type of, I think that the skills that we can bring to this work are skills like listening, skills like connecting with others, attitudes of humility, that we really abide by the understanding that although we may not have the answers, this work is too important not to try. But when we try, to have humility, to recognize that none of us are perfect, we are likely to make mistakes. And when we do make mistakes, to hear that, to recognize that, and try to do better next time. And not just try to do better next time, but really listen and learn and reflect and do teshuvah and do better next time. And patience for the people who are doing this work with you, patience for the communities. Yes, has it taken us too long? Absolutely. We should not only be arriving at these moments right now. The majority of white communities, as Deborah was saying, suddenly waking up and like, now is the moment. This has been happening for so long, but that doesn't mean that overnight everything is going to change. So not only having patience with the communities that we're working with, but also patience for ourselves, because I can speak for myself. I still have learning to do. And even though I might have been wanting to do this work 4 or 5 years ago, I might not have had all the skills and attitudes and knowledge that I do now to be able to do this sort of work that I can do now. So even patience for myself, and I'm not done learning and growing my skills, and neither are my community. So I do think that we all have these skills within us, and if we haven't honed them, that they're accessible to all of us.
So I want people to be taking these notes and Googling the Boston Impact Initiative and Googling the Boston Ujima Project, in particular, click on its investment piece. We're going to get more into that next week, but that's a really important one. It's interesting the way a conversation can go, because one of the things I also wanted to ask you, Tali, and then I'm going to go to some questions that are coming in and that everybody is going to want to have out a little bit. You manage a lot of volunteers. How do you help people be effective? You know, a lot of people are deprived. We can blame ourselves. We should blame ourselves, but we're deprived of encounters with the other because of the way our lives are organized. And then we show up to be helpful and we carry just baggage. And then it doesn't go that great. And then we leave with a worse attitude. How are we mitigating that? And is that encounter important? Is making that encounter successful an important part of the work? Or is that like a recreational nonsense, and the issue is equity, and how comfortable you are as a volunteer is not my problem?
I'm sure I mean, my volunteers organize me as much as I organize them, but at the very core of it, what I hope to do is to get to know people, to find out what people are really passionate about, what they care about, and then help them connect with others and access and gain tools and ability to make the change that they want to see in the world, and to recognize that we have agency, that we have power, that there's power in connecting with others and building relationships, and that the world is ours for us to mold, and that we can do it, and we can only do it in a relationship, and we can only do it by listening. And I try to help connect people and have those connections feel positive and feel like we're moving.
Say one more thing for me about relationship. You and I talked about this when we started organizing with our clergy. Rabbi Zecker's vision was that we change the culture, not that we have a task or a project. And she set a pretty high bar, and immediately someone said we should have a sister congregation. And there was a little bit of an interesting, I mean, we're telling tales out of school, but there was a little bit of an interesting pushback on that had to do with what does it mean to be in a relationship. Can you sort of go to that place? And then I'm going to throw it around with some questions. But I think that relationship piece, especially, I know there are groups with us tonight from a bunch of different synagogues, and I think that's instructive.
Yeah, if you're in a synagogue right now and maybe you're just starting this work, or maybe you're thinking about it, and particularly if you're a white Jewish person who, whether just recently or maybe always, you've cared, you want to do something and you're not really sure what it is that you're doing, then there are a few relationships that I think are imperative to your success in this work. And first is with senior leadership. As Andy just said, Rabbi Zecker and senior leadership at Temple Israel has been incredibly on board with this culture shift. This is not just a conversation that we're having once or twice. This is true culture change that we want to impact. So please be in relationship with people in your synagogue community who are in leadership positions. And then also, are you in community with people of color in your congregation and in your community? Again, this is not something that we're doing for others. This is something that we're doing with others for ourselves. And if Temple Israel has on our website stories from Jewish people of color who have experienced racism at Temple Israel. And this is not a unique situation. We are not unique in that way, that for most synagogues, especially predominantly white synagogues, which are almost all synagogues in the United States, Jews of color are experiencing racism on a regular basis. And we need to be recognizing that and reckon with that. And Jews of color should and probably want to be in a part of what we're doing. And so I really do recommend that if you're a white Jewish person at a synagogue interested in this work, that those relationships, that you're building those relationships, and that they are real relationships, not tokenizing relationships, but that you are doing this work while listening to people who are directly impacted, and recognizing that you are also part of being directly impacted, because we are a diverse Jewish community.
And you're being deprived of a whole segment of what can be contributed to your community by your own lack of awareness of it. So they have a website too. You can Google Temple Israel of Boston. There's a lot of stuff on there. Okay, I'm going to handle one question. Nia, can you come back so that you can help us with some of these questions, and we'll popcorn our way through a bunch of them. And I'm going to take the first one, and I don't want to discuss it because I find it so problematic, but I'm just going to take it and put it out of the way. And now I've created too much attention to it. Someone has asked about Black Lives Matter and whether there's a perception that it is anti-Semitic. And I just want to say a couple things real quick, and then the panel, if I've screwed it up, then save me. First of all, it is a movement. Movements can't be anti-Semitic unless you have an intensely data-driven method of showing me that a movement has embraced that as an ideology. It's a non-starter. Where did the seed of that story come from, that myth come from? There is an organization that is within that movement that has a name that uses most of those words, that put out a document. It was about a 50 or 60 page document with its ideology and its program a few years ago, actually, well before the 2020 scenario. And there was a piece in it about Israel, and those who feel passionate about Israel as a part of Jewish identity, as I do, found it repugnant. And it led to a whole fear that meant that anyone associated with the words Black Lives Matter adopted that paragraph, had that opinion, was in any position to stop that from having happened. And it's simply not the case. There's just no connection between the two. Black Lives Matter is a concept, and it can be adopted, embraced by anyone who wants to. So there is no need, in my opinion, in the Jewish community to be concerned about Black Lives Matter as a threat in any way at all. And I just want to put that out there. You can disagree with me if you want to, but I'm trying to rest my statement on facts.
I have one more bit of context, though, I think is very, very important.
Okay, please.
You're speaking of movement for Black Lives, which is not the same as Black Lives Matter. And the person who put that in was a Black Jew, or she had been a Black Jew. She was a halakhic Black Jew of parentage similar to mine. And she grew up in young Judea, took a trip to Israel, was doing all kinds of stuff. And somewhere, probably for the reasons that Tali mentioned about being not embraced in the synagogue or something like that, or whatever, but became distant from the community, was not embraced by the community, and kind of went to the other side. Now, actually, this happens a lot amongst white Jews, or as pro-Palestinian BDS as you could want to be, some of them, right? There are white Jews who are pro-BDS. You don't hear any complaints about that. This woman happened to be African-American, and she put it into that plank. That's where it came from. So look to yourselves. And that this is
I'm going to stop it right there. That was awesome. That's substance right there. You can Google it. But this panel is not on board for getting in. Look, that is, talk about a waste of time. The premise here is we need to up our game. Rule number one for me, don't get distracted. There is pain. There is agony. There's death on a massive scale right now. Before COVID, there already was. All right. So
Andy, I actually think it's really important. Just one thing that's important here is it's an elephant in the room for many Jews when they talk about engaging with Black Lives Matter and racial justice movements. And it's actually critical that we do what Robin did, which is to point out, and what you both did, where
this came from.
Bring it to the surface, because it's in the way for
Robin is right. You are right. I was being emotional about it because I find it to be a frustrating distraction, but we do need to meet people where they are and deal with it. The problem for me is that a lot of times in my experience, in the Jewish community, I'm not talking about a temple or an organization, just in general, we fill up most of the time with the things that we need to get out of the way first, and then we end up struggling to get to the stuff. Here's some of the stuff that's coming in with questions for Deborah and Nia, if you can chime in on these as well, and people will get to know your expertise more as we unfold. How I'm going to give you like 3 or 4 together. They're all financial. If I have a 401k and a little bit of savings, how do I invest in Black or BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color owned businesses? How would I know if my investments are aligned with my values? How would I even know? Where do I go to find that out? And what do we do as individuals? It's fine that an institution can allocate a piece of its endowment, but if I'm sitting at home saying I'm interested, what am I supposed to do on that topic of financial change?
Mm-hmm. Great. So I'm going to have very lukewarm answers for you, which is we're still, I think the financial industry is undergoing major change right now. So 401k. We have some 401k investors in our fund because people demanding to their 401k host that there be some alternatives. One, we went through the rigorous long process of getting approved. So like Millennium Trust is a good example of self-directed IRA and a 401k plan that said yes, meaning it is demand side driven right now. Most of the institutional investors, whether they are financial advisors, donor advised fund hosts, funds, don't want to make the shift. The reason, because it's a lot of work, right? The reason they're making the shift, and unfortunately, is demand side, is that some client said to their advisor, I'm uncomfortable, I want to do something different, show me a product, and if you won't, I'll go somewhere else. Donor advised fund folks. So I want to say, like, we started to work with Combined Jewish Philanthropy 7 years ago, who at first was like not ready to do this, and then they said yes too. So Combined Jewish Philanthropies, the Boston Foundation, Fidelity Charitable, are all donor advised funds that approved investing in our fund through a lot of work, demand side work, partnering with us, pushing the institutional folks to say, yes, if I have charitable dollars allocated to this institution, I should be able to put it where I care about. So I want
to be advocates where our money is for permission and be the demand pushing on it. Can I also write a check myself to the fund?
Well, I was going to say, so that's the first part. So then, and also I just want to say to the person, say, what are my investments? You got to look inside if you're in mutual funds, you got to look inside there. You got to look at what your investments are. And there's a lot of work around shareholder advocacy and other things, rating. So that's a whole other lesson. So we'll put that aside for the minute. Okay. You can invest as individuals. A lot of our funds, my fund, Nia's fund, all take, this is important, non-accredited investors. You don't have to be a
what, that I have less than a lot of money?
You are a non-wealthy person who can write a $50 check or $1,000 check or a $10,000 check.
Hold on. So I can give $50 to the Boston Ujima project, and
as an investment. You can do $2,000 to me as an investment, except not right now because our fund is closed. That's another story. You can buy notes at Blue Hub Capital. That's local. There are a lot of places that are open to non-wealthy folks. So investing in what are called community development financial institutions. Okay. There's a lot of things out there. You have to ask, maybe we can put a resource list together for Vilna Shul. There's a lot of ways to do it. And one more thing that's really important. Yep. Negative full spectrum capital. You make a grant, you make a $1,000 grant to somebody, you're going to get negative 100% return on that. None of that's coming back. So then you're like, that's my grant money and over here's my investment money and I want to make a lot of money in that. Right now with COVID, you want to consider moving money where you might get 80% of it back or 20% of it back, recoverable grants, forgivable loans. I know that's getting more complex. We don't have to get into all of that right now, but there's a lot more to explore with capital than the financial professionals are telling you to. And there are lots of groups in Boston. I suggest we do a resource list later where you can learn about how to move money in ways that are much more aligned with your values.
So on the knowledge side, we need a resource list about money issues. on the knowledge side, we need to be thinking about the diversity of the Jewish community and how we show up within our own, even a Shabbat service. And like, literally, there's a member of my synagogue who said, people always say welcome to me. And I'm like, how many times do I have to come before you stop? You didn't say Shabbat Shalom to me. You kept saying welcome to me. That was a painful experience that almost made that person never want to be there again. And thankfully, a gift to my community, he came back enough times to tell us that. So we have to, that's knowledge that we need. There's an attitude of openness. There's an attitude of embracing the journey that I've heard through a lot of your comments. And there, in terms of skills, Nia, I'm gonna give you the ability to
that to Deborah's response just really quickly, Andy.
Yeah, sure.
Unless this was still the question. Okay.
Well, I
sure.
want
So I just really quickly just
do whatever you want to do.
Go ahead.
You don't need a question.
Okay. So really quickly, I just want to add just a couple of pieces really quickly. Thank you, Deborah. Also, I would say in terms of how do you know your investments are aligning with your values, what I also want to add is not only are our funds and other funds and other resources designed for individuals to participate, a lot of thought and intention goes into the screens that we then turn around and invest those funds in. So Boston Impact Initiative, leading and influential in that space, for example, in terms of highlighting and uplifting racial equity as one of the values that they want to substantiate with their investment. And so they have, Deborah, I'm sorry, I can't remember Aliana's title, but I think, what's her title?
Impact director. Instead of
they have an impact director who's charged, for example, with that analysis and with that assessment. And so that assessment goes into the consideration of investments that BII makes. Likewise, Ujima, we have a community standards that we apply to our investments. And these are standards that were derived by our fellow community members, and businesses who apply to receive an investment from us must receive those, must pass those standards. And so there's what Deborah talked about in terms of trying to figure out what's happening with the money that you have now, where it is now. And again, with new products and new processes and new structures that are being created, part of the process is baking that analysis in. The second thing I think that I want to say, just with regards to knowledge, I've just been taking note, again, as I said earlier in the evening, and jotting down just certain words, questions, reflections, compelling thoughts that I've been hearing. And so one of the terms that was thrown out that we have varying backgrounds on is impact investing. I think a couple other terms I will throw out as well, that I'm a researcher. I think it's fun to kind of nerd out, read books, look stuff up, and kind of dive into a topic. And so if that's you, I would say look up solidarity economy. Again, to kind of find out
solidarity economy.
Solidarity economy. So we can for sure put together a resource list. And I think it's also accompanying that resource list, you can find lots of news, different texts that surround the organizations that will be on the resource list. So some other terms, solidarity economy, solidarity investing is another term that could be useful, and economic democracy, which is my favorite term. I think I would recommend.
We're going to get into next at our next session on December 7th, which is Monday night. We're going to get deep into economic democracy and all of Nia's favorite terms. And what I want to do, because I'm watching the clock, is ask for forgiveness that we didn't accomplish more, and do it more quickly, because there's an unlimited amount of good that each one of these generous panelists could have given us tonight. So I have an obligation to stop us at that and thank all of you for coming and being present. I really want your patience, everybody. This isn't entertainment. This is a service function that we're all engaged in. There's no, there's no hierarchy to it. We're either useful in meeting the moment, every moment, or we're not. And yeah, boy, is the insight of the moment of the night for me is the reminder yet again that for a lot of people, this year wasn't really that different. It's been bad for as long as people can remember, and they're going really quite crazy with this in telling stories about the fact that all of these very well-intentioned people who want to be allies are treating it like it's an episode when it's in fact a structural phenomenon that we can engage that way if we choose to, and I would urge us to do that. I want to thank you all. You're brilliant. I want to bring every one of you, should have had the whole time to just riff on your stuff. Please read Robin's work on GBH. And where else, Robin, can we see your latest work and what you're doing?
As soon as I update it, you can find latest work. But a good example of the eclectic nature of it is robinwashington.com.
robinwashington.com. How elegant and efficient. And Deborah, what's the website for the Boston Impact Initiative and some of the resources that you've been talking about?
So it's bostonimpact.org and deborahfrieze.com.
Fantastic. And Tali, where can we find some of the stuff that Temple Israel's been doing and that you've been working on?
Well, I don't have a Puterman.com, but you can go to tisrael.org to learn more about the Temple Israel community in general, and also about our social justice work. And my email address will be available on tisrael.org, which is tputerman@tisrael.org, if you would like to be in touch. But also I recommend signing up for our weekly justice newsletter, which you can also do from our website, or you could email me to get more information about if you want to be up to date on Temple Israel's justice efforts.
Just to understand, thank you. And to underscore something to those, there are representatives here from synagogues in a lot of different communities in Massachusetts and even in Rhode Island tonight. You can have a program of getting people to buy from BIPOC, Black, people of color, women-owned businesses, whatever you identify as a demographic, and you can have an investment committee. We got in our temple, I'm not bragging because we've barely started, but we actually got new people interested in our social justice work because we told them we were going to be doing investing work. And we got a totally different crowd to come and say, oh, that's interesting to me. I know something about that. I don't know, you're not just doing legislative stuff, which is important and still has to be done. So you can have those. And you know what? People like Nia and Deborah are actually really, really willing and flexible and patient to help you teach your people, as long as it's part of a process of getting them to action. And we're not abusing those that are doing this work and don't get to sleep enough. We need to show them that the reason we're bringing them in is not infotainment, it's to take action, to do the 80% that Woody Allen asked for, and then to finish the job up to 100%. Am I right? Nia, give us the website for the Boston Ujima project, which we will be talking a lot more about in the next session.
The website is ujimaboston.com, and I've just typed it in the chat.
Awesome. Hey, what a great privilege for me. If I did this every day, I would probably be good at it. Thanks for indulging. You've made my night very special. Marilyn and the Vilna Shul, it's back to you with this message. Guys, all of us, we need to take care of these organizations if we want them to still be here when the lights come back on. And the Vilna is pivoting, innovating, and look at it. They're pulling us all together. It's still a place for conversation, even if they can't bring us in the building. So thank you, Mark, Lynn, Marilyn, Vilna, to your team. Thanks so much.
I just want to add my thanks to everybody. I mean, my head is spinning. I don't even know what we were thinking about a 3-part series, Andy. I mean, I think it's got to be 10, 12 parts. I mean, there's so many topics that you've all brought up that I personally want to hear more about. And I'm just very proud of the Vilna for convening this conversation, and thank Mark and you, Andy, bringing this esteemed panel together. I hope you'll all go to our website. I mean, I just want to thank our partners, and I just give me another 30 seconds because I think it's really important for everybody to hear who our partners are with this, okay? Because we're honored to convene this conversation, and that's what the Vilna, how we can really be important in the community. We're in partnership with Combined Jewish Philanthropies, Jewish Family Service of Metro West, Jewish Family and Children's Service, Jewish Vocational Service, Facing History, Hillel Council of New England, Falmouth Jewish Congregation, Worcester Community Center, Temple Israel, Temple Shir Tikva in Wayland, Temple Beth Shalom in Needham, Action for Post-Soviet Jewry, Jewish Alliance for Law and Social Action, Jewish Big Brother, Big Sister, Jewish Collaborative Services of Rhode Island, and JCC's Jewish Community Centers of Greater Boston. There is a need for this. People want to know more. We want to learn. And I'm trying to listen. I'm looking at the chat. People are like, how do I get that resource list? So our website email info@vilnashul.org or Marilyn@vilnashul.org will come right to me. And if you're interested in getting that resource list, we will get that to you with the help of our panelists. And I just thank you all for a really thought-provoking evening. I look forward to learning more with you and together. And it is a cliche, but these groups coming together, we can accomplish more together, and especially during COVID, but even before and now after COVID, let's keep it going. So thank you all, and everybody stay safe.